ethical issues today, where we left off on Friday. I'm not going to talk for very long. I have a cold and I'll lose my voice, so I'll say a few things and then we're going to watch a film, which will be good. But I'll just tell you that this is a film that I am in, so you will still hear my voice because I'm actually in it. It's a very good film made by a student who was in the journalism school here. Got a master's in fine arts and made a movie about her mother who may or may not have schizophrenia. So we'll take a look at that, just the frustration that mental illness can have on family members. But first, let's finish up. Last week we talked about criminal commitment, what happens when somebody commits a crime. They also have a mental illness. We talked about the insanity defense, the insanity plea, and we also talked about being competent to stand trial. But what happens here if someone hasn't committed a crime at all, but yet they have a mental illness and they're considered to be dangerous, either to themselves or other people? Then somebody could actually be committed to a hospital, but under civil commitment law, not criminal law. They've not committed any crime. But yet the law in most states allows for someone to be committed against their will, even to a hospital, if they meet certain conditions. So in the state of California, the law here is the number of the penal code, or civil code is 5150. Sometimes people turn that into a verb and say he or she has been 5150'd. What that means in California is that someone has been committed to a hospital, psychiatric hospital, say here, John George Psychiatric Pavilion in Oakland, for a period of 72 hours. You can only be, though, committed against your will if you don't want to be, but committed by law under civil law if you're a danger to yourself or other people, or the state of California has another provision if you're gravely disabled. Now, what does gravely disabled mean? Well, it's kind of open to interpretation in many ways, but it's if you're basically not able to take care of yourself and you're not functioning. So if you were homeless, you're not feeding yourself, you're not clothing yourself, taking shelter, you might be rambling, and in every way look pretty seriously disabled, you could be then committed to a hospital under the 5150 law in California for a period of 72 hours. That would be, now, what happens at the end of 72 hours? Well, then it depends. A lot of times, sadly, people are released at the end of 72 hours because of the high cost of hospitalization, or people are given, they're stabilized within 3 days, enough so that the hospital staff doesn't feel a person's either gravely disabled or a danger to themselves or others, and they're released. Sometimes they're released into the care of a family member, or released with a prescription for medication, released with a strong recommendation to follow up with a psychiatrist or go to an outpatient treatment clinic, which may or may not happen. What happened with, remember we talked last week about the Staten Island slasher? This was the man who, that's the name the New York Post gave him, the man who went on the Staten Island ferry and killed 2 people and injured 7 others. What happened just prior to that was that he actually went to a hospital, a psychiatric hospital in New York City at Columbia. He went in saying that he was hearing voices and he was troubled by these voices. They were telling him to do things and he was very upset by these voices. He wasn't admitted to that hospital. Instead, he was given a prescription and pushed out the door. And then a couple of days later, he went onto the Staten Island ferry, and you heard the rest of that story. So the book goes into a lot of detail about court cases that have happened in the United States primarily over the past 100 years. It used to be the case, in the early to mid part of the 1900s in the United States, people could be committed to a psychiatric hospital really at the whim of another person. So if a husband was irritated with his wife, he could say, she's crazy, she needs to be committed, and that could actually happen. So there were many people in the early to mid part of the 1900s who were committed under civil law to a psychiatric hospital when they didn't need to be there. Or maybe they needed to be there, but then they were kept there indefinitely. And then as you read in the book, there are a series of court cases that said you can't do that, basically. You cannot keep people indefinitely in a psychiatric hospital. You have to demonstrate that they need to be there. Otherwise, you need to give them some treatment and release them. There's a couple of cases in there of egregious abuses where people were kept in there 20, 30, 40 years. In a hospital, no crimes are committed at all. They're just kept there, and they couldn't, for the life of them, get released. The Donaldson case is a good example of that. So then what happened following these court cases was, if you think of it as a pendulum, so in the early part, mid part of the 1900s, people were kept in psychiatric hospitals way longer than they needed to be. And the laws about who could be committed and for what reasons were very loose and fuzzy. And so people were being committed who didn't need to be and kept there longer. Then, through these court cases, the pendulum swung this way. So then by the 1970s, the huge movement that's sometimes referred to as deinstitutionalization, where the pendulum really swung in favor of the rights of people with mental illness who had been warehoused or locked away in these hospitals, so that they needed to be released. They couldn't be confined. That was a violation of their individual civil rights. So people by the thousands were released from psychiatric hospitals. But unfortunately, what was supposed to happen with the release from these psychiatric hospitals was the kind of seamless re-entry into a series of community mental health centers that were supposed to be built beginning in the 1960s with funding of John F. Kennedy. We're talking a lot about him as president now. He was very much in favor of developing community mental health centers across the country. But by the time people were released from the hospitals in the 1960s and 70s, that funding really never materialized. There weren't this network of community mental health centers built all over the United States, at least not enough to provide appropriate aftercare to ease the transition for people who've been in psychiatric hospitals, sometimes for years, into living outside of the hospital. And if you've lived in any institution for a series of years, whether it's prison or psychiatric hospital, making re-entry and living in the world is going to be difficult and challenging. So many people were released from the hospital, which was good, but was bad because they didn't have the appropriate support and care they needed after being released from the hospital. If they didn't have family members, a lot of times people became homeless. And so a huge proportion of people that were homeless in the 1980s, huge proportion had mental illness, no place to go. That's still true today, huge proportion. 45 to 50%, if not higher, of the number of people who are homeless have some other kind of mental illness. But the pendulum had swung, and it hasn't really swung back, so that now people are released from hospitals. They're not kept longer than they need to be, but it's very difficult for people to get into a hospital if they need to. After what happened in the 1970s, the number of hospital beds declined dramatically. It's super expensive to keep people in inpatient facilities, and so the hospitals were closed. There were not that many people. Sorry about this, my computer is not correctly. There weren't enough beds for people now. Hospitals closed. There's some statistics on this in the book as well about the decline of the number of places for people to go. Now, it's very difficult for people to actually get a stay in the hospital unless they're a danger to themselves or others or gravely disabled. And even then, it's hard to stay longer for a longer period of time in a hospital. There just aren't the beds. Insurance doesn't want to cover it, although that's changing with mental health parity, and hopefully with the Affordable Care Act, that will no longer happen. So while it was important to consider the rights of people with mental illness, now the pendulum is way over here. People can't get hospital treatment if they actually need it. Now, if people are still committed to a hospital, though, and they're considered to be a danger to themselves or others, we have to come up with a way of predicting dangerousness and deciding who is and isn't dangerous. And this is relevant for what we talked about last week with criminal commitment as well. How do we know if somebody is going to be dangerous? There's not like a test, really, that we can give to assess dangerousness. So we can't do fMRI to determine, oh, this is a dangerous person and this isn't a dangerous person. Really, the best predictor we have of dangerous behavior is past dangerous behavior. And really, what's dangerous behavior? Usually, we're referring to violent behavior. So if somebody has a history of violence, they're going to be considered at higher risk for being a danger to themselves or others than somebody who doesn't have a history of violent behavior. Now, there are some assessments that can be done, and the book talks about those, but they're not that great. It's still one of the biggest things that we as a field need to get better at is predicting dangerousness. Not only after somebody's in the hospital, but ideally, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could understand who with a mental illness is likely to be dangerous, even if they've never been dangerous before. Remember, we talked about how the people with mental illness that are dangerous, you hear about in the media all the time. These are the people who get guns and shoot and kill a lot of people. But in general, people with mental illness are far more likely to be the victim of a crime than the perpetrator of a violent crime. But yet it would be incredibly useful for us to understand, among a group of people with mental illness, what are some predictors of who might be violent. And there have been some long-term studies, and the MacArthur High Risk Project is one of them, to try to identify some risk factors among people with mental illness that increase their likelihood of being dangerous or violent. One is stopping medication. That's a risk factor. I believe we talked about these before. Number two is abusing a substance, whether it's alcohol or another drug. That increases the risk of violence for anybody, whether or not there's a mental illness or not. And three, among people with schizophrenia, is having a pretty severe paranoia. That can increase the risk of violence. But that's really all we've got, which is not that great. And when you hear about media reports of people with mental illness who've been violent, they sometimes are taking medication, they don't have any paranoia at all, and they weren't abusing substances. So we're missing some people. But the difficulty in trying to predict who will be dangerous is that what we're trying to do is predict a very infrequent event, because most people in the United States and the world with mental illness are not violent. Very, very small number. And so from a mathematical modeling and statistical standpoint, you're trying to predict a very rare occurrence. And so it's easier to come up with predictors when you have a large sample where you know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be dangerous or violent. But we're talking about predicting a very infrequent, very rare event. So it's difficult to come up with sample sizes large enough to come up with better predictors. It's a gaping need in our field is to do a better job of predicting dangerousness. One of the things that civil commitment law struggles with in these court cases that the book goes into excruciating detail about, try to balance, is the rights of the individual to live a free life in our society and not be confined if they don't need to be, versus the rights of society to be protected from people who may be dangerous in the future. And striking that balance is sometimes very difficult. So there are some who, given in the past 10 years or so, the number of media reports that we've heard about people with mental illness who've been violent suggest that we're protecting the rights of people with mental illness more than we're protecting society. And so that people with mental illness, we should take away more of their rights. Even though many people with mental illness in the United States, they can't even get a driver's license. There are plenty of rights that are taken away from people with mental illness. But the idea is that we are giving too much freedom to people with mental illness, and we need to clamp down on that because it will reduce these mass shootings and these things that we hear about in the media. But that, again, is kind of a wrong-headed approach because we're talking about a very small, infrequent, even though it makes a huge impact when it happens, but a very infrequent event where there's somebody with a mental illness who's violent. And so if we clamp down and remove more rights from individuals with mental illness, all in the service of protecting society, we're going to end up taking away a lot of rights of the individual with mental illness to protect society from a very rare and infrequent event. Very difficult problem. Legal scholars and psychologists are working on it. If anybody's interested in forensic psychology, it's a great topic for research. What about somebody has been, let's say, civilly committed to a hospital because they're considered to be a danger to themselves? Let's say they're suicidal. Once in the hospital, can that person refuse treatment? They didn't want to be in the hospital in the first place. They think they should be allowed to kill themselves. Leave me alone. It's my right. But yet here they find themselves in the hospital. Do they have the right to refuse treatment? Well, the answer is it depends. So if somebody is considered to be a danger to themselves, they probably will not be able to refuse treatment, at least while they're in that hospital stay of up to 72 hours. There have been several court cases, again, the book goes into these in detail about how people have tried to refuse treatment. And there was a case of a dentist, Scott Panetti in St. Louis, who didn't want to take any treatment. And if he's not considered a danger to himself or others, he does have the right to refuse treatment. But as soon as a treatment team determines that someone is dangerous, either to themselves or others, then they lose that right to be able to refuse treatment. They can be treated with medication, which is most often the kind of treatment that we're talking about here, even if they don't want it, at least while somebody is confined under civil law. All right, I'm going to switch out of this and switch to a movie. Again, this was made by a film student, and Janelle, I'm going to have you come up and switch it since you set it up. We'll get the volume right. Who got her master's here at Berkeley and did this film about her mom, who had lots of interactions in the mental health system. Good.
My mother used to sit on her lawn in a rocking chair for days at a time. Sometimes she would simply cry on her front porch. My brother and I rarely saw her during these years, and when we did, it was always on her terms. We would get phone calls, or she would stop by unexpectedly when she felt she was presentable. She would tell us, "I can't be with you right now," and "I'm doing this so we can be together one day." I think my brother stopped listening before I did. She could never tell us exactly what she was doing, why we were apart, or when the separation would end.
All right. I love you, Mom. I'll see you soon.
When I was young, I thought my mom was invincible. She worked 9 to 5, cooked all our meals, cleaned, and still found time to sit me on her lap and sing Bicycle Built for Two. In my eyes, she could do it all. My mother, Lynn, was born in 1939. She grew up in a suburb of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and graduated from high school in 1957.
Like all of us, we love the upperclassmen, especially the boys. And of course, years later, she married Bob.
Well, she was, number one, absolutely gorgeous, I thought. She had long blonde hair, and she was very personable, pretty sophisticated. We got married in 1961. She was just out of school and became an English teacher and was very good at it. And she was, she was a reader. She was pretty much an intellectual.
Both of us had married attorneys, and there was a wonderful group of about 80 women, and we called ourselves the Young Law Wives. And we gathered together over a decade at least, probably once a month. Those were the years we became really close, and then when she started having her children.
She decided after, I think, 5 or 6 years that she really wanted to become a social worker. So she stopped teaching, went back and got a master's degree in social work from Michigan State University.
Lynn, I think, was a woman ahead of her time. Most of the people that we knew pretty much were stay-at-home mothers. Lynn really was one of the very first to have her children be in daycare so that she could work and further pursue her education.
She was a social worker, and she was pretty good at what she did, so she got like all the most depressing cases, and she'd tell us, without telling us names and the confidentiality, she'd tell Carrie and I about some of these cases, and it's pretty depressing stuff.
She was absolutely brilliant as a therapist. That was her reputation. But she had a way about her that made it hard for some people to connect with her. People had her on a pedestal, and I think it made it hard to get close to her.
My parents called us into the living room of our house for a family meeting. I was 7. My brother was 10. They told us they were getting a divorce. I didn't really know what it meant, but I knew things were going to change. My brother cried. He said he was worried about our dog, Camper. I don't remember if I cried. I just remember my brother.
Our relationship kind of deteriorated, not in the sense that there was any acrimony between us or we were arguing or whatever. There just wasn't any closeness. And then at one point in time, she finally just said, this relationship isn't going anywhere, and I think we ought to get a divorce.
When my parents got divorced, she started working full-time instead of 3 days a week, so she had to support a household and do all the things that kind of my dad and her did together. And then she was studying nights to get her PhD.
It was shortly after she started doing that that we started getting reports about her doing some kind of bizarre things. And things like, she would be at her house, but hiding in the bushes.
The summer after my sophomore year, my sister and I ended up spending the full summer out at Lake Michigan, where my dad had a cottage. And when we came back, my mom had locked herself in her house, and she wouldn't come out. And she wouldn't open the door to see me. She didn't want to carry her. I had to see her in the kind of state she was in. So I can remember that summer a couple different times standing outside her door, asking her to open up the door, and she wouldn't. And she would tell me to go away, and she didn't want to see me, and things like that.
And then all of a sudden one day she disappeared, and we ultimately found out that she had hitchhiked with the truckers kind of across country. And I think that's the first time I realized, there was something really wrong here. And that was about 3.5 years after we had separated.
She called me once from Pine Rest, where she was hospitalized. And I went there, and someone walked me down a long hall. It looked like a jail. There were bars, and it was so devastating to see Lynn, my friend, in that little room with just a cot.
My mother's first admission to a psychiatric hospital was in 1984. She stayed 2 weeks, then escaped. 3 weeks later, she was found wandering around a factory in Colorado. She was sent back to Michigan and rehospitalized. As soon as she got out, she started traveling. She turned up in Oklahoma, San Francisco, Alaska, D.C. We never knew when we would hear from her or where she would be.
My senior year, it was a homecoming football game. We had gone to the homecoming parade. I got back home. I was getting my gear to go to the game, and the phone rang. I picked it up. It's a Port Authority cop in New York. And he starts kind of asking what my name is, and didn't know how much I knew about my mom. He was kind of trying to break the news to me gently. And they had picked her up on a bench in one of the Port Authority bus stations, crying or shivering or something. How she got there, I don't know. We talked for about a half hour. I remember being angry. I remember going out on the field that day, and I wanted to hurt somebody. I remember taking shots at people's knees on the field.
Mom needed help, but she didn't trust anybody. She thought my dad was in the Nazi party, that her mom was out to get her, that coworkers were conspiring against her. The court appointed a legal guardian to help with her finances. What the court couldn't do was hospitalize her for paranoia alone.
She, because she was a social worker, knew the mental health system very well and knew what her rights were within that. So she could manipulate the system very well. So in a court, she knew that you had to prove that she was a harm to herself or society. And she would pull herself together, and the doctors or social workers on the stand that were trying to keep her in an institution for a period of time to stabilize her, she would just literally tell them, I'm going to sue your ass off if you don't let me out.
She also would be on medications for a while and start functioning very well. She was active in her circle at church, singles groups at church. And then she would stop taking medication. She would begin drinking, and then she would become reclusive, and she'd shut everybody out to the point where she would then become hospitalized. Then there'd be changes again in her medication, and that pattern went on and on for years and years.
She was diagnosed numerous different times as either schizophrenic or manic depressive. I think it's splitting hairs. I don't actually think that the psychological community knows what the difference is, to tell you the truth. But I always think of her as manic depressive because she used to have big emotional swings, very high, very low. And you never wanted to see her really high and happy because you knew that it was going to be a lower low each time.
I think part of the diagnostic ambiguity had to do with the fact that the doctors really had little to go on. Unfortunately, in our field, we can't give a blood test or we can't do a brain scan to determine a diagnosis. We have to rely on what people tell us that their symptoms are.
She never ever engaged in talk therapy. She never would share anything. She was always very guarded. She never trusted anyone with her stories.
Mom cycled in and out of the hospital, twice in 1984, once in 85, twice again in 86. I remember an endless succession of new hopes, new doctors, new medications, Elavil, Haldol, lithium, L'Occitane, Ativan, Cogentin. When nothing seemed to work, some doctors suggested electroconvulsive therapy. Even her diagnosis was fluid. Major depressed with psychotic features, bipolar manic, bipolar depressed, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. I was 13, 14, 15, and beginning to lose hope. Then, something happened. In the spring of my junior year in high school, Mom began to stabilize. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. She was out of the hospital and looking for work. 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. She found a job as a therapist again. 6 months later, her court-appointed guardian was released. She had a sweet little apartment that I visited regularly. We would make dinner, drink coffee, eat little chocolate-covered cookies together. When I got a new outfit, I would run over and model it for her, and she would tell me how smashing I looked. I had waited for her, and she was back. So much had happened since then. I hadn't been back to that apartment in nearly 15 years, and I decided I wanted to see it again.
I started to really believe, actually, that maybe she would start being a consistent maternal influence in my life at that time. And then I started calling, and she was not picking up the phone. And whenever she stopped picking up the phone, that always meant, that something was wrong. And I called, just incessantly for like 4 days straight, no answer. So I remember, I think after basketball practice one day, I decided I'd come over here, and I just, I was going to come see her. Like, I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And I came, and, she answered the door, and I knocked, and I don't remember all the specifics of it, but I remember knocking and telling her, I'm not going to go until you open the door. And that's what she did. She finally opened the door, and she opened it about, that wide. And she looked out, and her eyes were kind of, I can't explain them. I just know that they didn't look right to me. And I could see behind her the